BookTube and welcome to a new video. This is a recent read, so 4 books. In Ascension by MacInnes, Scottish author, just came out. Linda Grant, The Story of the Forest. Christopher Priest, The Glamour. And finally, a fantastic title, Funeral Music for Freemasons by Swedish author Lars Gustafsson and translated by Yvonne L. Sandstrom. So I'm going to start with the MacInnes, which was the best of a very disappointing reading week, it has to be said. Anyway, so I saw Eric Carl Anderson talk about this. It was a very rare event, he said, where he finished reading it and straight away started reading it again. It so sort of suffused him and sort of provoked all sorts of thoughts and stuff. And it's also in my wheelhouse, but I have no compunction to read it again, and I'll get into that once I finish talking about it. So I'd read MacInnes's previous book called Infinite Ground, which is my introduction to his work, and it starts off brilliantly with some fantastic concepts and things that you don't think about and the connections that it made. But then it sort of meandered off into a sort of series of events and incidents that didn't seem to have any bearing on anything, and I felt very frustrated by the end. I know it's a book about people who disappear, and in a way the sort of aimlessness of this character's journey sort of mirrored that, but I was quite frustrated. This is a whole different kettle of fish. This is much more taut, tight. Plot and character are developed throughout. They're not sort of abandoned or left adrift as I felt in that previous book. In a way, this is quite a conventional piece of work in terms of its structure and its language, but you know, I think it has an awful lot that emerges from that's sort of worthwhile for your attention. So it's ostensibly about two sisters who are Dutch, and we get a lot of character work to start off the book, which is important because the book goes on to deal with some sort of big science, but it never loses sight of the fact that these are human beings, and in a way that's part of the point, because it's a book about sort of human scale in the cosmos and in the microsphere of cellular life, but he manages to sort of keep up the interest in the human character side. So they have very different memories of their childhood and of their abusive father, and they're both desperate to leave home when they grow up. And Helena ends up going to Jakarta in Indonesia, which is a former Dutch colony. And Lee, who's the main sort of protagonist in this book, ends up in the sort of scientific academic world. And the father dies, and their mother is left back at home in Holland. She lectures at university, but increasingly her mental health declines, and she's got some sort of slow-acting dementia, and the two sisters are on sort of continental apart from the mother, and they're always arguing, how are we going to keep an eye on her, how are we going to sort of help her get through this? One of them is going to have to give up something, it seems, and so the sisters are sort of divergent because of this sort of thing that's sort of driving them apart. So that's the sort of the character work. But as I say, it mainly focuses on Lee, the scientist, and she's interested in sort of the microbiology of the sea, and she forms part of a research study team who are alerted to what seems to be the biggest ocean vent on planet Earth to date. You may have heard of the Mariana Trench. Well, this trench seems to be far more deeper. And these trenches are significant because in a way it's where life on Earth originated, that they were like sort of mini furnaces that were sort of generating sort of energy pockets, and gradually cellular life, single cell life formed in them and were pushed out by the vents and went on to sort of clump together and form fish, and as we know, eventually fish went onto land and formed us. It's something I'm very interested in and have written about in a future work of mine in a short story. But this is a very strange trench. How has it stayed sort of hidden for so long? And on the dive, all the divers, including Lee, have a very strange sort of sensory experience. when something's that large and you lose sort of your landmarks and your orientation points. But they all sort of effectively are changed by it, but in a way they can't put their finger on it. And then there's the skipper of the crew, who's one of the divers. He goes back in, on his own without telling anyone, and never comes out. It's almost like he sort of jumped into the thing to be at one with it, to fuse with it. So Lee gets an academic posting, an industrial posting to a space exploration company because of her facility with growing algae, because a top secret mission is going to go further than any manned space flight has gone before, and it will need food. And as part of that, she is the backup crew in America, so they're the third crew. The first crew is in China and the second crew is in Russia. And of course her crew in the end is the one that gets sent off into space on this mission. And this mission seems to be, they have been summoned by an alien intelligence through a code that they've had to crack. And so they are flying out to meet this sort of first contact. They haven't seen it, they have no idea what it is, they've simply sort of calculated or decoded that they have been informally invited, as it were. So we get a lot about the trading, we get a lot about the growth of the algae, and it hits so many of my interest points, this. So for example, they're a 3-man crew, the other 2 are both veterans of the International Space Station, one has a military background, and he is struggling mentally and intellectually when he sees how slime mould works, because slime mould, as its name suggests, is a sort of plant-based bacteria or whatever, and it has no nervous system, it has no brain, and yet it displays intelligence. It is able to always navigate the quickest way to its food source, which is basically a sort of a sugar-based food for it. And even when you put it in mazes or you put obstacles behind it, it calculates somehow to overcome these obstacles. And of course, this military guy cannot be doing with something that has no brain and no overt intelligence, sort of overcoming the same obstacles that they're going to have to overcome. That he is charged with the decision-making process as the leader of this crew. And it does raise an interesting question that, they're going to the great unknown. They're going further than, any manned spaceflight has gone before. They're going to meet this alien intelligence they know nothing about. It's impossible to predict and to practice and rehearse things that have never been experienced before. They do the best they can, but they do it based on what they already know about space travel. And they do it on what they already perceive to be, this alien intelligence based on this message that it left behind. And it makes a really interesting point, I think, about if you encounter something never experienced on planet Earth before, there seem to be 2 ways of responding. One is just to be sort of overcome with awe, as if it is a god. But that is a paralysing reaction. You're sort of not able to really sort of function and think and get things done. So obviously the military man would reject that, but equally he will only throw against it what he's been trained to think, that he is only going to throw against it the regularities of things on planet Earth, because that is what he stands by, that's what he trusts. Even though you've got this thing that's going to put into question everything that planet Earth has revealed to him up till now, he's still going to rely on those rather tired and exhausted and tramlined ways of thought, because that has always worked up till now. So both of those are completely unsatisfactory strategies. So, they go on the flight, and I'm not going to say too much more about it, because that would be spoilers. But it is asking questions about scale, about the micro which is in the vent, about the origins of cellular life, and obviously once they're out to the cosmos and deep time, and how that changes all your perceptions, about time, time that's not lived on Earth, but just sort of almost eternity. I think the flight is 11 years, that they're on, and it completely changes your concept of time. And so the book is very much dealing with concepts of existence at both ends of the scale, and where do humans plot themselves on this scale, and why do we restrict ourselves by always operating on a human scale, which one would think is an obvious, that's the only thing we can do, but no, there's this cosmic scale and there's this micro scale. We need to start feeding the wisdom of these other scales into how we ourselves operate. So I did think that it was a very engaging, worthwhile read, but although it touched a lot of my touchstones, or hit a lot of my buttons, such as slime moulds, such as the origins of life in the oceans, all this sort of stuff, I'm not saying I knew it all when I went in, and it pleased me as we ticked each of these things that we came across. But I don't feel coming away from the book there's anything more that I'm going to think about. I'm like Eric, who wanted to go back and reread it. So I absolutely recommend this as a worthwhile read. 5 stars, but it's not going to get into my top 10 reads of the year. It was just a very satisfying read, dealing with some satisfying concepts that I thought about, and it's nice to sort of have them reinforced as to their significance and relevance. 5 stars. And on to Linda Grant, The Story of the Forest. So I saw Bob the Booker talk about this, and it sounded appealing. It's a multi-generational migration immigrant story, which, both of those are not in my normal sort of reading matter of choice. But it's also about storytelling, that migrants, the stories they have to tell in their host countries in order to either pass as locals or at least give the answers that are expected of them so they don't stand out too much as others, as aliens, as immigrants. So that's why I was interested in it. And it starts in Latvia, a Jewish family. They're reasonably well off. The father owns a bakery. And one of his daughters, who's 14 years old, she goes off into the woods to collect mushrooms with a basket, just like Little Red Riding Hood. So it is very much pitched as a fairy story. She doesn't meet a big bad wolf. She actually meets some very respectful, well-mannered, well-behaved young men. And it turns out these guys are Bolsheviks that they're meeting in the woods out of the prying eyes of the local secret police. And, she hooks up with one of them. She's only 14. They have a chaste kiss, and that's about it. But this story throughout the book keeps getting spun and spun and spun into all sorts of different interpretations, and question as to whether it really happened, or in fact, is it really a fairy story that the 14-year-old, once she grew up, she peddles as for whatever her reasons are. Anyway, when she gets back home, her older brother Yossel sort of gets it out of her what she's been up to, because there's another brother who's almost he's very much a malign influence on within the family. He acts almost as like a secret policeman, even though he's not an adult yet. He's spying on them, and he files away the information until he can use it to his own advantage. So it comes out what she's been up to. This older brother Yossel is very concerned about the reputation of the family, and suggests to his parents that he should take the sister and they should go to America, and in order to sort of protect her reputation. The parents are really against this, but the brother prevails, and they're on the boat, and the brother Yossel meets a merry widow, and despite the fact that he's on a voyage to protect the premature reputation-ending relationship of his sister, sort of does the same for this woman he doesn't know from Adam, really. She's another Jew. And they get off at Liverpool because they're going to take another boat to get to America, but they can't afford the money because the woman he's married insists that they're not going to go sort of below decks. They're going to have travel in decent style, and he doesn't have the money for it. So he's going to work, make the money. He suggests that she should go off to America and that he would join her, but she says no, we're going as a family. So they basically set up in Liverpool, and they never really escape. They never make that journey to America, which is true of a lot of Jewish migrants. And not just that they ran out of money, but also some were hoodwinked because they'd come from sort of, you know, places like, you know, rural shtetls, you know, these sort of Jewish communities in the middle of nowhere in Russia, they'd never seen the ocean. They didn't know what America looked like. They didn't know how long an ocean-going trip would take. And they were sort of let off in Britain or in Ireland. You know, there's a small Dublin Jewish community of people who thought they'd landed in America and were told they'd landed in America. So this whole thing about the channel boats being exploitative, yeah, they are. They're taking money for very, very dangerous trips and sort of inflated money. But a similar sort of scheme was going on, you know, 100 years ago when people were being ripped off, told they were in America, and they weren't. They were in Britain. Anyway, so this family starts to establish itself in Liverpool in the UK. And that's when we get to the multi-generational thing. And after the promising start, I just felt that this book told a story of these people, new generations and other people introduced all the time without us ever really reconciling what had happened to some of the other characters, and it did no more. And I need more from a book than just telling me a story. Yes, there is this stuff about, you know, the reliability of her original fairy tale story, but even that wasn't enough to sort of jump beyond the pages of the book. And, you know, one of the things it's dealing with is that you know, there were two younger siblings were left behind in Latvia with the parents. And one of them perished at the hands of the Bolsheviks when they took over Latvia. And the other, we don't know what happened to that person, but it's presumed that they ended up in the camps, in the Nazi death camps. And right towards the end, there's a sort of a third-hand witness to the fate of the one that they assumed was in the camps, but they didn't know. So one of the characters, who by this time is the fourth generation of this family, goes to meet this woman so they can compare notes. To try and track down what exactly happened, what was the fate of this guy, which is fine. And this is literally the last 10 pages of the book. But just as, you know, they're talking and comparing notes, this woman suddenly leans across and sort of points out this sort of mole on the woman and sort of says, "Oh, you want to get that looked at? That could be dangerous." It just seems so random. You know, why is that there? We're 10 pages from the end. We're getting to a sort of huge revelation, supposedly, about the fate of one of the siblings left behind. And we get this from a character we've just been introduced to. We don't know what her stakes are. And also, beyond the book, we don't know what this mole is, because it's irrelevant. And I just felt that sort of summed up the whole book for me. That it's just a lot of incidents, very sort of, you know, homely and mundane, and, you know, sort of infidelity and running off with, you know, a non-Jewish woman and marrying her and leaving his wife behind. You know, deaths from old age, or, you know, all this sort of very sort of family stuff. But as I say, it doesn't leap off the page. It just sort of, you know, we go from one to another. The pace is okay. It doesn't sort of plod or anything, but it doesn't lead to anything, to my mind. And also, I did think there were one or two rather odd bits of writing. It's a surprisingly unliterary book. I didn't feel there was many sort of metaphors which might have made it come alive. And let's face it, what is a fairy story but a, you know, a sort of symbolic story? So this is a sort of, you know, sexual scene of sex talk. I'm revolting. That's a laugh. We both know what I taught you to do with your mouth. You went for it like a bird takes to the air. Which is a very curious simile. Because when birds take to the air, does he mean it's a natural reflex like birds, you know, take to the air? Well, first of all, birds have to store up a lot of energy. You know, if you take a bird like a vulture, it uses all its energy in takeoff, and that's why it uses the convected air currents of warm air, that it floats on it, so it saves its energy. So it's not flying as much as gliding or floating. Or if you're talking about newborn birds, fledglings, it's a huge, supreme struggle for them to learn how to fly, to take off for that first time and to stay airborne. So that simile doesn't work. And then there's another strange one. It's a good job, Itzik was saying. You intellectuals don't believe in bourgeois morality in your private lives. It would be so embarrassing for a different type of man, a conventional type, to bear the reputation of a cuckold. A sour possession rose up again in Roland's throat like heartburn. He had thought of her as a butterfly impaled on his pin, reserved for his inspection and admiration and enjoyment. Damn her, damn the bitch. Well, apart from the sort of impaled butterfly is quite a sort of cliched image in itself, you know, there must be more interesting ways to try and convey the notion of sort of perceived ownership of one's spouse. Then we go, damn her, damn the bitch. I just occasionally I found the writing in here very I'd say very unliterary. I think I gave it 3 stars. And on to Christopher Priest, The Glamour, which is a buddy reader with Fraser at Springboard Thought. And I think we were both underwhelmed by this. I've read a couple of Christopher Priest books, and, you know, one was decent. The other, called The Affirmation, was really, really good. So I had high hopes of this. And it's basically a love triangle, as will be the 4th book. And all 3 of them have the power of invisibility. But it's not treated as a superpower. It's treated as a curse, really. That the full-on invisibles, of which one of the characters, Niall, is never seen. And they can, you know, when you're invisible which is called the Glamour, you can pass through society. No one will see you, no one will hear you, no one will smell you. No, you know, if you talk, no one can hear you. So it is a real cloak of invisibility, or in this case, a cloud. And it's got a rather sweet origin in that it's taken from a sort of, it's called Glamour from ancient Scottish language, about a spell used in an Marata, so that other love rivals can't see that person. It's only you who can see them. It's a way of sort of, again, sort of controlling and dominating a sexual partner. So that's sort of quite a sweet fairy tale like thing. But in here, the invisibility, as I say, is a curse that most of the people who have it can't really cope with it mentally, because they are outsiders. They're on the margins of society. They don't, you know, they sort of squat unseen in people's houses. They steal food from shops. So that's Niall, who's full on. Then we have the woman at the centre of this triangle, called Susan, or Sue, who has half and half powers. She only has invisibility really sort of full on when she's in Niall's presence. When she's away from him, she can live and function as a normal human being, but she seems drawn to being with Niall and sort of feeding off his invisibility. And the 3rd character, Richard, is completely unaware that he has this power at all. He doesn't realise that he can be invisible, because it doesn't really manifest itself. And Richard starts going out, forms a relationship with Sue, but he's completely dragged over the coals because she can't let go of Niall. Now, he's never seen Niall, obviously, because Niall is invisible, and he doesn't understand the whole concept of what he's dealing with, what he's up against. So he just thinks that she can't let go of this former lover, but it's much more involved than that. And their love triangle gets very nasty, quite unpleasantly so in the one sex scene in the book. And, you know, I didn't understand why the glamour, the invisibility, was treated, you know, as I say, from sort of quite a nice, quaint origin story of the sort of Scottish spell. Why it's such a negative thing here. It's you know, it's a real misery book for all 3 of them, because Richard, he's a BBC cameraman, and he's just, as I say, started this relationship with Sue when he becomes an innocent bystander caught up in an IRA bomb in London, and is severely injured and has to recuperate for a long time, learn how to walk and stuff. But it also means he's forgotten everything that had happened. He doesn't even recognise Sue when she comes to visit him. So the book reconstructs, you know, how they got to that point before he forgot everything. And I don't think the flashback story helps sort of draw. As Fraser said, and I agree with him, this book is written almost without concern for the reader, without wanting to draw us into it. It seems to have no concern with that whatsoever. It writes what it writes, and either we get on board with it or we don't. I felt peculiarly held at arm's length throughout. And as I say, the sort of retrospective reconstruction of how we got to this point, of, you know, all told in flashback, I don't think served the book well at all. So really, really disappointing. The denouement obviously had a twist. I'm not going to spoil that. It wasn't enough to save it. It was also something that I think was done much better in the affirmation. Similar sorts of ideas. I think I would recommend you read that rather than this. I gave this 2 stars. And finally on to Lars Gustafsson, the book with one of the best titles I've ever read, Funeral Music for Freemasons. I've no idea, having read the book, why it's called that. It have no bearing on anything. Another love triangle, only this time in Sweden in the 1950s. And the 3 characters, one is, they all want to get away from Sweden. So one ends up in New York. I think he's a lawyer, or a banker, he's one or the other. One goes to Senegal. He's a poet, but he's sort of given up poetry, though he sort of writes his own private poetry in a notebook. He goes to Senegal, where he has opened a general store, and he also gives boat trips for tourists. But it's sort of implied that he's up to sort of shadier business, that those are just fronts, and that 2 of the people he has taken on his boat to Guinea-Bissau, the border with Senegal, and they've hopped off his boat into Guinea-Bissau, where they've presumably gone to create troubles, you know, help stage a coup or whatever it is. And the Senegalese have brought him in for interrogation because the Guinea-Bissau government complained to them about his operations. So his story is potentially quite interesting. It is the main one. It's also the one that's written in the first person, as the other 2 aren't. And the love interest is this woman in Sweden who is the only one who doesn't get out of Sweden. She's an opera singer, but she basically never rises above the level of being a provincial opera singer, and is, you know, has her career sort of stilted and doesn't progress. And that's about it, really. There's not much more to say. Yeah, I didn't really get on with it. 2.5 stars. And that's it. That's my recent reads. So till next time, thanks very much.